everybody. I am here with Lara Adler on day 2 of the DIY Detox Summit. So the summit's on another channel, but I'm coming on to Facebook a little bit every day to answer some questions that come up during the summit. And I thought Lara would be an awesome person to have on because he will have a lot of questions when it comes to replacing toxins around the house and in beauty products. So welcome, Lara. Thanks for coming on.
Of course, you know that I'm a big fan of you and what you're doing and this conversation. So I'm happy to be here and happy to kind of field questions that have come in.
Awesome. Yeah, I know we got a lot of views of your talk.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'll start out with one that I noticed this morning. We did cover a few things in your talk. We covered plastic, fragrances, beauty mostly. And this person is wondering more about cleaning supplies. So, you know, we didn't cover everything because it's an awful lot of stuff under your roof.
Yes.
But maybe you can tell us like some of the most harmful things to watch out for in harmful or most common in sort of toxic cleaning supplies and some better options.
Yeah. So, I think that people don't often realize that a lot of the chemicals that we're trying to avoid, for example, in our beauty products are also showing up in our household cleaners. So, there's sort of similar products are being used. Obviously we're not using bleach products in our beauty care, but we are using a lot of the same chemicals that are in beauty care, particularly like the fragrances and the preservatives in our household cleaners. And so, I think obviously right off the bat, if we're working with or using household cleaners that have fragrances added, which is just about all of them, including ones that sort of purport to be more natural, like pine sol is sort of intended to be reflective of pine, like a pine tree, because pine trees have very powerful constituents in their oils that do afford some cleaning power, but when they're synthetics or they're just a tremendous amount of sort of synthetic pine or lemon fragrances added, that's really, one of our primary issues with cleaning products is the fragrances that are in those products that are just completely unnecessary. I think, when we're looking at household cleaners, an important thing for us to do in general is to really redefine how we consider or what we consider to be clean. So like I was saying, a lot of people associate clean with pine or lemon or bleach scent, but that's actually not what clean smells like. Clean doesn't smell like anything. And so we just want to move away from fragrances. Beyond that, there are certainly caustic or irritating chemicals that are used in household cleaners like sodium lauryl and sodium laureth sulfate. These are irritating to our skin. They can be penetration enhancers, which means that, if there is skin contact, those chemicals will increase the rate at which other chemicals absorb into the skin, which we don't want. A lot of these chemicals are respiratory irritants. So anything that's like a bleach or an ammonia can be really irritating to the respiratory system and can cause sort of more acute toxicity issues or more acute reactions. So, the conversation around toxins is very often had in this chronic conversation, meaning that these low levels of chemicals that don't affect us on a day-to-day basis, but long-term exposure affects us. When we look at household cleaners, often the conversation is reversed because people can have acute and immediate reactions, whether they're respiratory reactions, migraines, things like that, because of these really strong fragrances. So, there's, on one hand, so yes, we want to get rid of fragrances. We want to be careful of the sodium laureth, sodium lauryl sulfates. But here's the rub, which kind of makes this space of household cleaners really challenging. In the United States anyway, companies are not required to disclose their ingredients for household cleaners. So oftentimes we just don't know. Yeah. And because of that, because, it doesn't make sense for us to kind of make a laundry list of really long chemical names that we can't pronounce and be like, I got to be on the lookout for that. It doesn't even matter because many of these ingredients just won't even be listed on the labels anyway. And so what I really recommend people do is to use some of the resources that we have available. For example, the Environmental Working Group has a household cleaners database. We have the Made Safe certification, which is really vetting ingredients. It's particularly with something like Made Safe, they really require companies to submit full ingredient lists for them to review. And you can find products that are better, that do not have these ingredients. And thankfully, there's more and more of these products out there. So for people that are wanting to switch to household cleaners and they don't want to make their own, because look, you can certainly make your own, right? I've definitely made a lot of my own household cleaners over the years, and it's really inexpensive and you don't need toxic chemicals. You can do vinegar, you can do alcohol, you can do some essential oils. Those are great ways to make DIY cleaners. Not everybody has the time or inclination to do that. And so for those people, like, go to the Environmental Working Group's household database, go check out the Made Safe certification for household cleaners, and you'll find there's really quite a number of brands that exist now that are free of all of these chemicals and that are safe to use every day.
Yeah. And one reason I don't spend always a ton of time talking about cleaning stuff is because it's like sort of boring. So it's cleaning stuff. Boring. And also, it is pretty like doable. Like, if you smell something that smells super toxic, or like it says, keep 100 feet from your children, like, it's probably bad. And there is something to replace it with. You can, scrub. You have a recipe for scrubbing your oven with, to make this abrasive paste. You can buy that stuff yourself. I like 7th Generation brand, but there's a lot of brands out there. So it is really possible. You can clean with essential oils, like you mentioned, disinfect with them. Going back to the smell of clean thing, Razzie Berry has a talk on this on Sunday about heightening our intuition. And when we're constantly bombarded by artificial smells, we sort of lose a sense of what's going on in our environment. So it's really interesting. I'm really into essential oils, but I don't like to use them all day long, kind of because of laziness. But also, like, I don't think we need to be constantly.
It's constant input. And so, there's actually, some research that's showing that children that are on the autism spectrum, who are very sensitive to these different sensory inputs, whether it's sound or sight or smell, these can often be behavioral triggers for people that are dealing with autism, because they're just being inundated with sensory input, and things that we take for granted, like all these scented candles and the air fresheners and the really strong laundry detergents and all of these laundry products that promise to have your clothes smelling fresh for weeks. We don't think anything of them, but if a child is dealing with sensory issues, I think it's worth eliminating as many of those excess and unnecessary sensory inputs to just kind of see if that helps. And I know I've read a lot of interventions that people have done where it's just really helped. And so, this is just, whether it's a sensory input for ourselves when we're not dealing with something like autism, or if people are dealing with autism, I think it's a distraction. Our homes don't need to smell like anything. And often people are using a lot of these fragrances in their homes. I think we talked about this during our talk, to cover up bad smells, and that bad smell might be mold.
Yeah.
So don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great point. So I know we did cover water somewhat on our talk. I can't remember everything we talked about, but I thought, maybe we could, I know your principle, because I study with you, is ideally, what's in your water by testing, looking up your reports, and matching your filter to your system.
Yes.
That being said,
yes.
People are going to have the question, what about this filter? What about that filter?
Yes.
Maybe we can just run through some of the popular ones and just say some of the pros and cons of each.
Yeah, sure. If you want to throw some at me. I mean, I don't know all of the brands, but I definitely throw them at me.
Let's start with Berkey.
Yeah. So
what is Berkey, first of all?
So Berkey's a gravity-fed water system. People are like diehard fans of Berkey's. They're great. I know a lot of restaurants that have them that, filter their water, at least here in Portland. It's Portland, Bridget, you know.
So slow. They're so slow. I can't believe
I know. So that's one of the cons. So the pro of a Berkey is that it's a gravity fed filter, which means there's no electricity is required. If the power goes out, you don't have to rely on anything. You have it. So it's good for like emergency situations. It does a really good job of removing a large number of contaminants. So it makes really good water. But it's not very practical when it comes to anything beyond drinking water. So the Berkeys are just these big, tall, metal canisters that you fill at the top, and then through gravity, it filters down to the bottom canister. And it takes a while for that filtration process to happen. It can take, a couple hours for that to filter through, depending on, the state of your filter. And so it's not very practical if you've got a lot of people in the house that are, consuming a lot of water. It's not very practical if, you want to make sure that your water that you're cooking with or water that you're bathing with or brushing your teeth with is filtered. A Berkey's not really going to do anything for you in that instance. As somebody who used to live in a really tiny, like 600 square foot apartment in New York City with the tiniest kitchen possible, for people that have limited space, a Berkey's not probably going to be a good fit for them. I was not willing to give up any of the 24 square inches of countertop space that I had in my New York City apartment for a water filter. And so, if you're really short on space, a Berkey's probably not going to be a good fit because it needs to sit on the counter. So if you just want to have a really great filter for drinking water, Berkey's a great option. But beyond that, I think that it's just really limited. It's just a really limited system.
For volume.
And for cooking.
Yeah.
If you're cooking a big soup and you need 6 quarts of water, well, there goes your Berkey. Like now you have to fill it up, it's not practical. In that regard. So it's not practical from that perspective. But yeah. I know a lot of people that have Berkeys and love them for what they're good at, which is drinking water.
Yeah, they're they're very simple to use. They look nice. They're fairly affordable. You can get one with like a dent in it. It's like even cheaper. The water tastes great.
Yep.
Yeah, but what else are some? Yeah, I think if you have a decent sized kitchen, it doesn't take up a lot of room.
Yeah, you just have to remember to like fill it up, right?
You have to remember to fill it up, and sometimes you can't tell because it's pretty heavy on its own.
Yeah.
Whether water is in there or not. But I had one for about a year, and I was happy with it. And then we moved to the desert where we knew we did have a lot more water. I was more concerned about our water quality. Like you said, it's not going to clean your shower water or a bunch of other water. So I got interested in a whole house system, which I have now. So let's talk about the pros and cons of either an under the sink reverse osmosis, or what I have is a combo. Like I have a pre-filter in the garage, gets a lot of the stuff. And then under the sink, I have
which all whole house systems should have. Frankly. Okay. So like anybody who's getting a whole house system, I think what happens is people go into a situation where they're, talking to a sales representative who's trying Culligan or whatever, that's trying to sell them a water filter. And they're like, I want a whole house filter. I don't want anything else. I want to be covered and
easy.
Not have to think about it.
Easy, right? Yeah.
Easy. And then when the sales rep is like, yes, you also need an under sink filter, they get like, why are you trying to sell me on the second filter? Shouldn't the whole house filter take care of that? And I think what people don't realize is that the whole house filters can't remove everything. And the reason is, in order to really be effective at removing contaminants, the water needs enough time to go through the filter media. And there needs to be enough of the filter media. And so if you need to have water pressure in a house for 3 people or 4 people, or one person's in the shower and somebody else is cooking and the dishwasher is running, you're not going to be able to, in order to maintain that water pressure, the water has to go through those big filters pretty quickly, which means that they're not really going to be capable of removing all of those contaminants. So we need a backup system, and the backup system is why, for example, with a whole house filter, you still might have like an RO filter or something like that under the sink. And so anybody who's looking at a whole house system should be prepared to have a whole house system and a point of use system. And the point of use is like at the kitchen sink, at the bathroom sink if you want that as well. And so people should just go into those situations knowing that that's what they're going to need. The pros of a whole house system is that it can really dramatically reduce, or in some cases remove, some of the chemicals like chlorine or chloramines, or the disinfection byproducts that are produced from those chemicals being in our water supply, which means that you can take a shower and you can take a bath without really having to worry about a lot of those chemicals. And so the pro is that, any faucet in the house you turn on, it's fairly good to go. The downside is that they're expensive. And like I said, they don't filter everything out. So you'll always are going to need a second point of use. So for example, if somebody has fluoride in their drinking water, a whole house system is not going to be able to reduce that in any significant amount. It just won't be able to. And so you're going to need a second filter at the sink in order to take that fluoride out. They can be expensive. The other thing, and this is tricky, this is where you really need to kind of do some homework and maybe talk to a couple of different companies, is that the amount of the media in the whole house system needs to be enough to actually have a big impact. So some whole house systems, they just don't have enough activated carbon, for example, to really do a great job removing these contaminants. And so you just want to kind of take that into consideration. And obviously, if you don't own your home, then a whole house system is probably not going to be an option. Right. If somebody's renting, forget it. That's not an option unless you can convince your landlord to install a water filtration system.
Yeah, I can kind of cover the pros and cons that I experienced too. Mine is with Aquasana company. And when I called in, I got a really great deal, and they did ask me about the sort of size of our house. That helps them gauge the volume of filter you need. So that was helpful. The system wasn't that expensive, but then we had to get some help installing it. It says you can install it yourself, but we had to get like a hole drilled in our granite, and then we ran a line to the refrigerator. So basically the installation ended up costing more than the system.
Wow. Yeah.
But still, overall, it wasn't that bad. And then, it does use water. It's not the most, energy efficient. And then
that's the reverse osmosis part, right?
Right. Yeah. Just the reverse osmosis uses water. It runs very slowly. The water coming out of our fridge, I almost wish we didn't run it there because it comes out so slow. So we just go to the tap and use our little spigot. So not the end of the world, but a little thing. Reverse osmosis is sort of stripped in a way. So ours does have some remineralization, but I don't know all the ins and outs of that and how well it's working. So I think it's probably still savvy to do some electrolytes or drops of minerals sometimes.
Yeah, I definitely think that remineralizing reverse osmosis water is important. I think that's a important stage to have after. It's basically the final stage that the water goes through before coming out of the faucet. But yeah, in particular, just with reverse osmosis, reverse osmosis, generally speaking, will remove the vast, vast majority of any contaminant that we're dealing with, which is great, but it's still not necessarily the thing that I recommend to everyone. Like if RO didn't have any downsides, then I would be like, yes, just go buy RO. It doesn't matter. But the reality is that RO does have downsides. Like you said, the water flow can be pretty slow. The biggest issue is that RO systems tend to be extremely wasteful. So, for every, it might take 2 or 3 gallons to produce or you might lose a gallon of water for every 2 or 3 gallons that you produce. I don't remember what the ratio is, but you lose a lot of water in the reverse osmosis process. And, for people that are living, for example, in California where there's drought and they have to be really careful of their water, like RO systems are not a good solution because they're wasteful. It's a wasteful way of processing water. And so, I think that when we're thinking about water filtration, there's so many different variables that we have to weigh. It's not just what can I afford? It's not just how much space do I have? It's not just what kind of contaminants do I have? There's all of these variables that sort of factor in together that I think we have to kind of do a little bit of jigsaw puzzling in order to really find the right solution for ourselves.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll ask you about one last one that's probably
Yes.
the most common, the Brita.
Libretta. So look, if this is what I say, if somebody is really on a tight budget and they're like, I can't afford anything more than a Brita, fine. A Brita is better than nothing, is what I say. Provided that you actually regularly change the filter. I know far too many people that leave their Brita filter in long after it should have been replaced. And that's actually doing more damage than good because there's a lot of bacteria that can build in those filters. People don't think about that.
Okay.
So, the Brita cartridge is really small. And, yes, the flow rate through the filter is slow, which means that the water's kind of drip, 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 drip. It takes a little while for your pitcher to fill up. And it's primarily activated charcoal in there, which means that it's going to help reduce, some VOCs, things like chlorine and, some other chemicals that really affect taste. But they're not really going to do anything significant for a wide range of other contaminants that may be present. Like I'll use fluoride, for example. Brita filter is not going to remove or reduce fluoride. They just doesn't have the right type of filter media. And so it's not, and same thing with like Pure and those little faucet ones that you screw onto your faucet.
Oh, yeah.
Same things, like the amount of media in those filters is really, really small. So they're not really effective. They are better than nothing. They're probably better than bottled water because bottled water is just not.
You don't like it because of the plastic, usually.
I don't like it because of the plastic, but I also don't like bottled water because it's not nearly as regulated as tap water is. And a lot of bottled water is just municipal city water that's been put in a plastic bottle, and it still has all of the garbage contaminants that we're trying to avoid. And you're paying like a 1900% premium for it. Why would we do that? It's just so profoundly and grossly wasteful on so many levels. So unless it's an emergency situation, really just don't think bottled water is something that we should be using, period. So, Brita is better than nothing, but it's really the bare minimum of what people should be doing. I think, maybe 30 or 40 years ago, a Brita might have been maybe even more than that. 50 years ago, if the Brita had existed then, would have been sufficient. But I think we're kind of past the point where a really simple basic filter like that is going to have offer enough benefit due to the type and the amount of contaminants that we have in our water. The Environmental Protection Agency, through the Safe Drinking Water Act, only regulates 89 or 91 contaminants. And there's hundreds of contaminants that are present in our water. So many of the contaminants that are in our water are not regulated. So that wasn't the case. We didn't have that many chemicals 50, 100 years ago. So we've just passed the point where like these more basic systems are sufficient, in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah. And I think if you want a small portable, as we talk about needs and, affordable, small, there are pitchers that are potentially better. So you can kind of read and compare, and it is some work, but, I think it's worth it to not just buy the first thing you see when it comes to your health. So
yeah,
put in a little effort. So there's a lot we could talk about. I know you're working on big projects. I don't want to keep you. I do want to share a resource you have. Is it a practitioner resource? Tell us more.
Yeah. So yes, this is a practitioner resource. So for anybody who's listening, who's any kind of health practitioner, health coach, nutritionist, naturopath, chiropractor, acupuncturist, doula, midwife, whatever, who wants to learn more about the toxicity that your clients or patients are being exposed to, and what to start doing about that. I have a top 10 toxins practitioner checklist, which really outlines like what are the top toxins that people are exposed to, where are these toxins being found in our daily lives, and what are the kind of health issues that these exposures are being linked to, so that you can kind of start to prioritize what areas you want to address in terms of these toxic exposures with your clients or patients. And do you want me to just give the URL, or do you have the URL?
I don't have it, so if you could send it to me in the chat.
I can certainly do that. Let me just pop that in. It is just Lara. Yeah, it's Lara.
Yeah, you can say it if it's easy. Sure.
Yeah, it's easy to say. So it's Lara Adler, and that's LARAADLER.com/top, the number 10, and then hyphen DIY detox. So top 10 hyphen DIY detox.
Maybe a little hard.
It's a little bit hard. It's not the easiest, but
not for people like me, because I'm not very talented. Okay, I'm going to put this in the comments here. I put this in a few groups, and I have some work to do. Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for being on the summit. As you know, I think avoidance is so important. I feel like I honestly didn't get it on the summit enough, because there aren't enough people like you out there. So hopefully we scoop up a few more of them before the next time we do the summit. But if people haven't seen it and you're here on Facebook, we've been posting about it quite a bit. So would love for you to join and tune in. You're on day 2, so you didn't miss much, and we'll have an encore later. I'll put that link in here too, in case you have not joined. Whoops, sorry guys. Yeah, and thanks again for watching and learning with us. We really appreciate it. And you know, pick up Laura's resource if you're a practitioner. I graduated from one of her courses recently. She's excellent. I mean, this is just a small sampling, of her knowledge. It's very deep. So if frankly, if you're any practitioner worth your weight in anything, I honestly think you need to know this environmental piece. Like, you know, it affects our food supply. It affects kids, like you talked about. It affects fertility. So, you know, even if it's not going to be your main specialty, it's something you want to be versed in, so that when people come to you and say, well, what do you think of this water filter? You're not just like, you know, you want to have at least something to say. This stuff takes a long time to learn. I'm probably going to have to retake her course a few times just to like let it sink in. But come, you know, she's got introductory courses. She's got this free resource just to kind of start on the path. But I really encourage you to, you know, follow her and stay involved if you're a practitioner, because this stuff is, I think, the greatest challenge of our modern day. So thanks again, Lara. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks, Bridget.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.